Outpost One, a post-apocalyptic survival audiobook, written by Scott Medbury, narrated by Adam Barr. 1. The cold in the high Cascades didn't just sit on the skin. It burrowed, seeking bone like a hungry worm. Caleb Harrison shifted in his chair. Outside, the wind worried at the walls, and the timber of Outpost One groaned in answer, like an old wooden ship flexing against rough seas. 83 days. 83 solitary days of monitoring the radio and watching the dead strip of highway below for movement. The cabin stood alone, just outside the ruins of Hope, where the forest was slowly swallowing everything whole. From its perch on the ridge, it commanded a view of the only passable route between his hometown, Hammondville, in the Nicola Valley, and the rotting cities of the Pacific coast. The timber was worn and weary, patched over the years with whatever scraps the sentinels, who occupied it 3 months at a time, could scavenge from the abandoned buildings within walking distance. It had been 11 years since the Pyongyang flu had hollowed out North America. To the south, the occupation had turned the United States into a prison colony, stamping the red star over every state and territory except a handful in the east. To the north, Canada was a graveyard. The invaders didn't want the land, only the oil. They'd fortified the wells and pipelines like a spine of iron through the wilderness, sealed the border to prevent crossings, and abandoned the rest of the country and its young survivors to rot. The survivors didn't rot, though. The first winters culled many, but those who survived learned to trade, build, and fight together. Older teens, once concerned with exams, TikTok, and Instagram, forged new order from the ruins. Islands of stubborn humanity coalesced, places with names unknown on old maps. Hammondville was one such place, a cluster of salvaged houses and town buildings, named after the survivor who led its first settlers, and held together by barter, hard bargains, and a stubborn refusal to die out. Inside the cabin, the air smelled of damp wool, gun oil, and the sharp, stale tang of old coffee. A sheet of corrugated tin rattled rhythmically against the eastern wall, a loose tooth in the wind's mouth, but Caleb had stopped hearing it weeks ago. A single bulb flickered overhead, struggling against the gloom of the overcast afternoon. Its erratic pulsing cast long, dancing shadows across the map-covered walls. Caleb stood up and walked to the wall. He traced a finger over the topographic paper, stopping at the cluster of red pins to the south. Raider camps. Every year they inched closer, scavengers pushing up from the carcass of Vancouver. Rumors from passing travelers spoke of larger gangs, scavenging old military gear, even forming armies, some with tech. He'd always half dismissed it as campfire talk. Most accounts painted the city's remnants as disorganized and ruled by gang law, violent, unrestrained, and aggressive, but rabble all the same. "Stay down there, you assholes," he muttered, tapping a pin near the Fraser River. He turned back to the small potbelly stove, pouring the last of the morning's coffee into a battered tin cup. It was black and bitter, but it was hot. He sat back down at the desk, bumping his knee against something hard and unyielding. He paused, took another sip, and then set the coffee cup down before peering under the desk. A heavy wooden crate was pushed against the wall. He didn't like handling it, but standing orders required a visual check every shift for condensation, frayed insulation, or the green bloom of corrosion on the terminals. He leaned down and flipped the latch. Inside sat the dull, clay-like bricks of C4, wired in a complex web that fed through the bottom of the crate and down along the structural supports of the cabin into the rock below. A tactical scorched earth contingency, Rafi Singh called it. Caleb's name for it was simpler: the dead man's switch. Rafi, 26, the same age as Caleb, was once a high school Army cadet playing soldier on weekends. Now he was the commander of their militia, the man who organized their defenses and had come up with the idea of the outposts and wiring the ridge as a weapon of last resort. Caleb latched the crate and sat up, exhaling a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. The detonator remote sat innocuously next to his pencil cup. It looked like an old, clunky garage door opener, cold and heavy, with a switch at the top and the red ignition button at the bottom. Flip the switch, and a 20-minute timer would start its countdown. In a real emergency, though, he could bypass the delay and blow it immediately with the ignition button. If it worked as it was designed to, it would tear the granite shelf loose, sending it, the cabin, and the unfortunate button pusher crashing down onto the highway below, sealing the pass in an instant. He gingerly pushed it towards the back of the desk. 7 more days. Just 7 more days until his relief arrived for their 90-day stint. Then he could go back to Hammondville and a world that didn't require him to sit on a powder keg. He took a sip of coffee, grimacing at its bitter yet welcome taste. He checked his watch. 1,400 hours. Right on cue, the radio receiver sparked to life. The silence of the room was shattered by a wave of static before a voice pushed through the interference, clear and warm. "Outpost One, come in," the voice crackled, weaving through the static. "Still alive and kicking out there, Caleb?" He grinned, leaned back in his chair, and pressed the transmit button. "Copy that, Bethany," he drawled, letting his voice drop into that easy, lazy rhythm he reserved just for her. "Just like the last 83 days. Starting to think you only check in to make sure I haven't wandered off and joined the Raiders." Bethany's warm laugh carried over the airwaves. It was the best sound in the world. "Please. They'd kick you out in a day. You talk too much." "I talk just the right amount," Caleb countered, staring at the radio as if he could see her through the mesh speaker grill. "Keeps the ghosts away." "Are the ghosts bothering you, Cal?" Her voice shifted, losing its teasing edge and dipping into professional concern. "Did you get the report from Outpost 3? Caleb's smile faded. He sat up straighter, the playful mood evaporating. He looked north on the map, to the pin marking David's sector, 5 miles up the ridge, near the Great Bear snow shed. "Yeah, I spoke to David last night," Caleb said, eyes moving over the topographic lines. "He was edgy. Said Miller called in movement on the valley floor and he hadn't been able to raise 'em again." Miller, Outpost 4's sentinel, better known as Methuselah, was the only one in town who'd survived the Pyongyang flu as an adult. He was only in his late 40s, but they called him ancient, and in the 11 years since the fall, he'd pickled himself in moonshine, perhaps subconsciously seeking to validate the title. Outpost 4 was quite a way out, and David was the only outpost in range of the old man's radio signal. "The council didn't put too much weight in the report," Bethany said. David said Miller sounded as drunk as a skunk and couldn't give him any details. They figure he is just on another bender and probably sleeping it off. I figure the same, Caleb said. But you never know. Yeah. The militia is on standby here, just in case. But the static hissed for a moment, and when her voice returned, it was brighter, forcing the darkness back. Down here in the valley, it's quiet. Actually, it's beautiful. We put together a market in the square this morning. The scavengers found a cellar full of peach preserves near the old motel. Carter tapped a new barrel of whiskey, and I got my hands on some flour. Caleb closed his eyes. He could almost smell it. Civilization. Don't tell me. Pumpkin scones, Caleb. Fresh out of the oven. A groan escaped them. You made scones without me? That's cruel, Beth. That's a crime. I didn't make them for you, she teased, though her voice had softened. But I might make a fresh batch next week when you come back. I'm holding you to that, Caleb said, his stomach rumbling at the thought of soft, warm dough instead of hardtack and beans. Maybe save me some of Carter's whiskey to wash them down, too. Are you saying my scones are dry, Caleb? No, not at all. But you know I don't drink tea, so I need something to wash them down. She murmured. You coming home will be worth celebrating, so scones and whiskey it is. 7 more days, Caleb whispered, more to himself than the microphone. He looked out the reinforced window. The sun was beginning to dip, casting long purple shadows across the snow-dusted firs. 7 days, and I'm claiming my share. Glad I'll be there for the spring festival. I know. It'll be the first real one since Mayor Peters died, Bethany added. Yeah, it'll be fun. He hesitated, his finger hovering over the button. He had spent 3 months in this box, rehearsing what he wanted to say, and now, with the end in sight, the words felt heavy in his throat. I was thinking about the dance on the first night. The dance you call lame every year? Yeah, that one. He rubbed the back of his neck, feeling the heat rise in his cheeks despite the cold. I was thinking maybe it wouldn't be so bad if I had the right partner. I'm asking you to save a dance for me, Beth. The radio was silent for a long beat. Caleb held his breath, terrified he'd overstepped, that the low static was actually her searching for a polite way to tell him no. Then her voice came back, softer than he'd ever heard it. I already saved you one, she said. Been saving it since that last festival was canceled. I even found a blue dress for it. So don't you dare stand me up. A laugh slipped out of him, half breath, half relief. His eyes closed as he let the picture come. Bethany in something clean and bright, the music spilling from battered speakers, string lights sagging between the town hall and the armory, her hand finding his in the crowd. It's a date. Knock, knock, knock. The sound was tinny, coming through the radio speaker, not his own door. Beth, we need you, a muffled voice shouted in the background of the transmission. Ernie's trying to calibrate the generator again, and he's sparking the whole grid. Bethany sighed, the sound loud in Caleb's ear. I have to go. Ernie's going to blow us up before the raiders even get a chance. Go, Caleb said, disappointment and affection warring in his chest. Save the town. We'll talk tonight? Tonight, she promised. Stay safe, Caleb. Always. The connection clicked off. Caleb sat there for a moment, staring at the silent radio, the ghost of her laugh still hanging in the stale air. He exhaled, shaking himself out of the lingering daydream. 7 days. He could do 7 days standing on his head. He picked up his cup, intending to finish the cold dregs of his coffee, when the radio erupted. 2. It wasn't the gentle static of atmospheric interference. This was a stream of electronic feedback, a sharp, oscillating shriek that made Caleb spill his coffee. The hot liquid splashed across his boots as he bolted upright. "Mayday! Mayday! Outpost 3 to command!" It was David, but the voice was wrong. High-pitched, breathless, and terrified. "They're coming! A bunch of them! I counted at least 3 trucks. They've got radio detect—" The roar of gunfire and the rumble of heavy diesel engines silenced the other sentinel. It wasn't the shots that chilled Caleb's blood, but the engines. Vehicles meant the enemy was almost on them, not days away on foot. Caleb snatched the mic, his knuckles white. "David, come in. What's your status?" "They're tracking us!" David screamed, his voice barely audible over the noise of wood splintering. "Turn it off, Caleb! Kill the radio! They're using the signal to—" A deafening boom exploded through the speaker, a shotgun blast at close range, and the line went dead. No scream, no static, just dead air. Caleb stood frozen, the microphone trembling in his hand. He looked at the map on the wall. Outpost 3 was 5 miles north, up the winding grade. He was now the only thing standing between whoever had just killed David and Hammondville, between them and Bethany. Caleb stared at the dead receiver, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. The silence from Outpost 3 was louder than the gunfire had been. "Turn it off," David had screamed. "They're tracking us." Caleb's eyes darted to the signal strength meter on his console. The needle was jittering nervously. He grabbed the frequency log. For the last hour, while he and Bethany were talking, the background interference had been steadily climbing. They hadn't been ghosts. They had been pings, ranging shots. Every word he spoke was a lighthouse beam in the dark, guiding the wolves straight to the door. He looked at the map again. 5 miles. Even on cracked asphalt, trucks could cover that in 15 minutes. He had to go dark. Almost immediately, the flaw in that plan hit him. If he went dark and failed to stop the raiders, Hammondville would never know. They'd be blind to the slaughter rolling down the ridge toward them. He swore and slammed his hand onto the desk. He had to warn Bethany, then switch to broadcast only, so the beacon pinned them to him, not the town. He seized the microphone, his hand trembling not from fear but from the adrenaline flooding his veins. "Outpost 1 to base," he barked, stripping all the softness from his voice. He waited. 1 second. 2. Nothing but the faint whisper of static. "Base. Bethany, please pick up." There was another pause, an agonizing 3 seconds of static, before her voice cut through. She sounded breathless, like she'd been running. "Caleb, I thought we said tonight. Ernie is still—" "Listen to me," Caleb shouted, cutting her off. "Code black. Outpost 3 is gone. David is dead." "What?" The word was a gasp, small and horrified. "Caleb, what are you talking about?" "Raiders. Lots of them. They have trucks. They overran David. I heard the gunshot. He's dead, Beth." "Oh, God. Poor David." Caleb was moving as he spoke, his free hand flying across the desk, grabbing his revolver, his ammo box, and the detonator. Beth, listen carefully. David thinks they were tracking RF signals, that they rode our frequency right to his door.
Tracking signals?
Bethany's voice hardened, the organizer in her taking over.
Then get off the air, Caleb. If they're tracking...
I can't. He looked out the window. The trees to the north were still, but a flock of crows had just launched themselves into the gray sky, startled by something he couldn't hear yet. If I go dark, then they might bypass me and head straight for the town. I need to buy you time to mobilize.
Caleb, no,
she warned, panic bleeding into her tone.
Do not do what I think you're doing.
I'm leaving the broadcast channel open, Caleb said, his voice dropping to a terrifying calm. I'm going to crank the gain to maximum. I'll act as a lure. They'll lock onto my signal and come here. That buys you 20 minutes to get the civilians into the shelters and get the militia on the wall.
You can't face them alone, Caleb,
Bethany shouted. I don't plan to. That's not the protocol. There was silence as Bethany absorbed what he said, what he meant.
No, Caleb. Set the timer. Fall back. Make your way to the bridge. We'll meet you there.
The timer's fixed at 20 minutes, Beth. You know that. It's supposed to be enough for a sentinel to get away on foot. But they'll be here in 10, 15 if we're lucky. They'd be through the pass and on your doorstep before you can load your rifles, Caleb said. He checked the cylinder of his revolver. 6 rounds. I'm the speed bump, Beth. That's the job.
To hell with the job. I am ordering you to fall back.
I can't obey that order, Beth, Caleb said quietly. You know I can't.
Caleb, please.
Her voice broke, shattering into a sob.
Don't be a hero. Just come home.
He closed his eyes for a second, letting the pain in her voice wash over him. He wanted nothing more than to run, to grab his gear and tear down that mountain road until he was in her arms. But he looked at the map. He looked at the red pins. I need you to promise me something, he said, his voice thick.
I'm not promising anything.
If this goes wrong, if you don't hear the ridge come down. He swallowed hard. You have to blow the Nicola River Bridge. You blow the supports and drop it into the water. Cut them off completely. She was silent. Beth, if they cross that bridge, Hammondville burns. Promise me. The silence on the line stretched, agonizing and heavy. He could hear her breathing.
You stupid, stubborn man,
she whispered, the fight draining out of her.
You promised me. You promised me a dance at the spring festival.
Caleb forced a smile, though tears were stinging his eyes. Sorry, he whispered. He heard a low rumble in the distance. Not the wind, not thunder. Engines. They're here, Caleb said softly. Bye, Bethany.
Caleb, wait!
He didn't wait. He flipped the switch on the console from transceive to broadcast only. The red light on the radio panel hummed to life, steady and unblinking. The line was open. He could no longer hear her, but she could hear everything he did. He was a beacon in the dark now, and the wolves were closing in. 3. A cold mechanical clarity settled over Caleb, muting the panic that had threatened to choke him only moments before. His world shrunk to the 4 walls of the cabin and the task at hand. He quickly checked the revolver and placed it on the desk before picking up the detonator remote and slipping it carefully into the deep pocket of his canvas jacket. He felt the weight of it against his hip, and he ran his thumb lightly over the smooth button, familiarizing himself with its position. He had to wait until they were close, until they were on his doorstep. The rumble outside grew from a murmur to a vibration he could feel in the floorboards. The window panes rattled in their frames. He walked to the window, peering through the gap in the shutters. The first vehicle rounded the bend, emerging from the tree line 300 yards up the slope. It was a nightmare of steel and spikes, a heavy transport truck clad in a patchwork of scrap metal that had been hammered and welded into makeshift armor. A small radar dish, jarringly new against the rust and grime, was bolted to the top of the cab. From the front bumper, a rusted cow catcher, its metal teeth ground to razor edges, jutted out like a jaw. Behind it, 2 lighter trucks fishtailed and swerved down the grade, all 3 vehicles bristling with armed men. Caleb breathed a sigh of relief that they hadn't simply passed by Outpost One and headed straight to Hammondville. He turned back to the desk and positioned himself in the chair, facing the door. He placed his revolver on the map, right on top of the pin marking Hammondville, and poured the last of the coffee, now stone cold, into his cup. He glanced at the radio. The red broadcast light stared back at him like a bloody eye. "If you're listening, Beth," he murmured, his voice steady for the microphone. "First visual contact. 3 vehicles. Heavy armor on the lead." He took a sip of the cold coffee. It tasted like ash. "They see the cabin. They know I'm home." Outside, the squeal of brakes cut through the engine roar. Heavy doors slammed. Shouts echoed. Harsh commands carrying on the thin mountain air. "Won't be long now," Caleb narrated, his eyes locked on the heavy oak door. He picked up the revolver, thumbing the hammer back. The click was loud in the small room. 6 miles away, in the basement of the Hammondville Town Hall, Bethany gripped the edge of the comms desk so hard her fingernails bit into the wood. The room was silent. The militia commander, Rafi, the mayor, and a handful of other council members were staring at the speaker. They heard the scrape of Caleb's chair. They heard his steady breathing. They heard the eerily calm play-by-play of his final moments. "Won't be long now."
"Oh, Caleb,"
Bethany whispered. Tears streamed freely down her face, hot and fast. Back in the cabin, Caleb watched shadows move to either side of the door before the handle rattled as someone tested it. It was locked, of course, but it was old and wouldn't be a deterrent. A heavy boot slammed into the door. The timber groaned, dust falling from the ceiling. Thud. Thud. The wood splintered around the lock. Crack. The door flew open, kicking up a cloud of snow and sawdust. Caleb saw the silhouettes in the doorway, men wrapped in furs and leather, faces hidden behind rebreathers and goggles. The lead raider raised an automatic rifle. Caleb didn't hesitate. He snapped the revolver up and fired. The lead raider jerked sideways with a roar, the round catching him high in the shoulder and spinning him into the doorframe. The others scattered, diving for cover and raking the room with blind fire. Bullets chewed up the walls, splinters spraying like shrapnel. A round pinged off the coffee cup on the desk, flinging black liquid across the map. Caleb ducked, but not quickly enough. The impact of the bullet felt like a punch, followed quickly by a searing line of fire that raced down his arm. As he slumped against the desk, his numb fingers dropped the gun. "I got him!" said a harsh voice beyond the doorway. Caleb smiled grimly through the pane. "Yeah, you got me," he thought, curling his fingers around the remote control. Back in Hammondville, Bethany put a hand over her mouth when the raider said he'd gotten Caleb. But then, like a small miracle, she heard his voice. "Please, don't shoot. I'll come out. I surrender." Behind her, the mayor cursed. She shushed him with a violent chopping gesture.
"All right, kick your weapon out here."
"Okay." Bethany heard something heavy and metallic skitter over floorboards.
"All right, stand up nice and easy."
"I love you, Bethany," came Caleb's voice, strong and steady.
"Oh shit, get out! He's got a—"
one of them shrieked. The speaker let out a sharp crackle. Then the transmission cut out, the red signal light fading to black. For a heartbeat, the basement was as silent as a tomb. Everyone held their breath, suspended in the vacuum of Caleb's sudden silence. Then, the earth moved. It started as a vibration in the concrete floor, buzzing up through the soles of Bethany's boots. The hanging lights swayed violently, casting nauseating shadows against the peeling paint. Then came the sound, a low, rolling thunder that wasn't coming from the sky, but from the north. It was a deep, mournful roar, the sound of a mountain breaking its own back. Dust sifted down from the ceiling rafters, coating the radio console in a fine gray powder.
"Report!"
Rafi barked, breaking the spell. He grabbed a handset on the wall.
"Tower 1, report! What do you see?"
Bethany didn't move. She stared at the dead radio, her hand still clutching the edge of the desk so tightly her knuckles were white. She knew what they would see. She knew exactly what that sound meant. The voice from the watchtower crackled over the room's intercom, shaky and awestruck.
"Visual confirmation. Holy hell. The Coquihalla summit is gone. It's just gone. There's a dust cloud rising hundreds of feet in the air. The pass is buried."
A ripple of subdued relief washed through the room. The town was safe. The bottleneck was closed. Bethany slowly released her grip on the desk. She felt hollowed out, as if the explosion had scooped the insides right out of her. She stood up, her legs trembling, but holding her weight. "Bethany," the mayor said, reaching out a hand. "I'm so—" She walked past him, past Rafi, past the celebrating onlookers, and up the stairs. Numb, she pushed open the heavy doors of the town hall and stepped out into the biting wind. The sun was setting, painting the sky in bruises of purple and red. To the north, like a gravestone against the horizon, the massive plume of dust was now 1,000 feet high.
"You fool, Caleb,"
she whispered to the wind, her voice cracking.
"You magnificent, stupid fool."
2 weeks later, the spring festival went ahead as planned. It had to. The townspeople needed to know that life continued, and that every victory, no matter how costly, had to be savored. String lights were draped between the crumbling brick facades of Main Street, powered by the generator Caleb had helped Ernie fix 12 times. A fiddle player and a guitarist sat on the steps of the library, playing a tune that was lively, but had a ribbon of sadness running through it. Children ran through the crowd, chasing a ragged soccer ball, their laughter echoing off the walls. Bethany stood at the edge of the square, near the checkpoint that had led to the bridge. She wore a blue dress. It was soft, made of cotton that had survived the damp, and it felt strange against her skin after years of denim and canvas. In her hands, she carried a basket. She walked past the festivities, nodding to the people who offered her sad, grateful smiles. She walked until the music faded behind her, until the only sound was the wind rushing through the sagebrush and the rush of the Nicola River. She stopped at the barricade where the road began its long climb toward the ridge, or what was left of it. The devastation was visible from here. The V shape of the valley was now a flat wall of broken gray rock and splintered trees, Caleb's final resting place. She set the basket down on a flat stone near the riverbank, then reached inside and pulled out a cloth containing 2 pumpkin scones. They were golden brown, still warm from the oven. Next to them, she placed a heavy glass bottle of Carter's amber whiskey and 2 tin cups. She poured the whiskey, 1 cup for her, 1 for the empty air. "They're not dry," she said to the silence, picking up a scone and breaking it in half. Steam rose from the soft orange crumb. "I used extra butter, just like you asked." She took a bite, the sweetness turning to ash in her mouth as tears she thought had finally dried up came again. She chewed through the sob, swallowing the grief down. She picked up her cup and tapped it against the other one, then held it up toward the rubble. "I love you too, Caleb," she whispered. The end. You've been listening to Outpost One, Volume 1 of America Falls, The Ghost Nation Chronicles. Written by Scott Medbury. Narrated by Adam Barr. If you're new to the America Falls universe and would like to explore more, you can start the original series with Book 1, Hell Week. You can also find out more about Scott and all of his series at scottmedbury.com. That's SCOTTMEDBURY.com. I'm Adam Barr. Thanks for listening.